Hello, welcome to another Mad Lab, joined in the studio today by Nik and our special guest, Kerwyn Salmons, here with you for some super insights into the world of paid social media. This episode is called The Big Things Schools Are Getting Wrong with Paid Social. Kerwyn's from a digital marketing agency called 15th Media. Kerwyn, welcome to the studio. Great to have you here. How are you doing?
I'm all good, thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Cool. All right. So just tell us a bit about what your business does and why that's super relevant to schools right now.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so I started the business about 9 years ago. So my background is actually more sort of like direct to consumer retail style campaigns. So literally for 5-6 years, myself and my other co-founder Ollie, that was kind of our bread and butter, really. School wise, it's sort of like the same sort of process, really. Obviously, it's very, very different to ecom in the sort of like there's more offline events going on, but I think typically we looked at the market when we came in. It's still much the case today in terms of considered purchase, high value purchase, emotional purchase for most of these parents. So as I'm sure we'll get into a little bit, it's a market that maybe didn't really understand the power of the funnel, retargeting, stuff like that's still fairly alien to the sector, which is confusing at times. But yeah, trying to take a sort of a bit more of a performance marketing approach, trying to help schools look at cost per leads, ROAS, etc., all of that sort of stuff that previously I feel like, or still now, really isn't that well looked at.
Yeah, and is this UK schools? Are you working internationally? Tell us a bit about the global reach of the
Yeah,
business.
yeah. So we were predominantly domestic, so in UK market we've been involved with schools now for 5 years. So I'd say for about 3.5 of those are just purely UK based. I think our focus as a business over the last 18 months has been more international.
Okay, so I think I'm going to ask you to assume that we're talking to an audience who don't really know about paid social, what it is and how it works. So can you just give us some of the basics first of all? There are going to be listeners with different levels of understanding and expertise in this area, but give us the paid social 101.
Yeah, cool. So essentially paid social, if you're imagining your different marketing channels, I think it really helps first to sort of like think about where they sit. So typically if someone says Google, for example, we know someone's actively searching, then typically I'd say that comes a bit sort of further down the funnel. So how ready am I to purchase, really? If I'm actively searching on Google, if I'm actively searching private schools near me, let's say, for example, in the UK, then we make that assumption that that person has more intent, therefore they're closer to buying, and therefore it's sort of further down the funnel. I would say paid social historically has always been a bit closer to the top of funnel. It's a bit more disruptive. So it's essentially the premise that people who are using Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok, whatever, they might be actively scrolling the platform, and then via various targeting methods, whatever, we're essentially getting in front of those people with these schools to say, look, here we are, start a conversation, disrupt, engage, and yeah, spark a bit of curiosity, I guess, is predominantly being sort of where paid social sat. Obviously, retargeting is a massive part of paid social these days, has been for years and years and years. But essentially retargeting, which I think, again, some people in the sector might not fully grasp, is essentially just this idea that anyone who visits your website, anyone who engages with a specific ad, and it gets very, very granular at times, essentially we can reserve adverts to those people who might be potentially interested in your school or product.
I want to ask a controversial question, Kerwyn. Why should schools care about this? Their business is education. Why should they care about something as dirtily commercial and granular as retargeting on social?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I said at the start in terms of how considered as school purchases. I think, and I always try and use this example. So obviously I mentioned my background has always been sort of like retail, really. So I know, for example, if we have an average order value of say £1,500 on a sofa, for example, or £50 on a houseplant, I know that it still takes 6 or 7 visits through to that product's website before people go ahead and purchase the product. So I think when you're dealing with schools and why schools need to care about it, is that ultimately, if we're considering lifetime value of most of these students, it might be upwards of £150,000, £200,000 or Great British pounds, really, across from, say, prep to sixth form, let's say. If we know it takes 6 visits for me to sell a £50 house plant, how many visits do you think it probably takes to sell a £150,000 education? So I think what we've seen in the sector and where I think a lot of schools are going wrong on the sort of like the quantitative side of it is that essentially, if you imagine, if I'm just leading with a please come to my open day, please come to my open day, please come to my open day. Knowing how much these schools get up to and sort of the range of the product, the value of the product, they're massively, one, underselling themselves, but two, they're not creating any buy-in. They're not really nurturing these parents who probably, let's say, even if they are on their shortlist, there's so much that's going on at these schools, as I'm sure you guys are aware. You go into these schools, sometimes the product's fantastic, the people are fantastic, the stories, the narratives, everything. And I just find that that's how you're going to get people to buy into the brand. Alongside that, where schools are really interesting, why they're so fun to work with, is because you've got so many different products within the actual bigger set. Boarding, day, specific year groups, scholarships, whatever it might be. But essentially, we're trying to sell someone that product, educate them about that product, and create familiarity with the brand. And I don't think that that's something anyone can really do off the back of one advert, if that makes sense. So retargeting plays a massive, massive role in terms of just sort of helping shape that narrative and structure it.
That was a devastatingly good answer. Thank you. You've convinced me.
Yeah, no worries.
I guess it just works. We see it every day in our consumer lives, don't we? We look at a pair of trainers on website X, and before we know it, that pair of trainers just follows us around wherever we go digitally. It happens every single day to every single one of us. Probably the vast majority of people don't realize that's a retargeting campaign sitting beneath it. Hugely powerful, hugely powerful. You mentioned a plethora of social channels there. Do you see any trends emerging, Kerwyn, in terms of which ones are working best for schools in terms of cut through and ROI?
Yeah, I think it really depends on what your KPIs are. I think the one that's still overlooked, and I think it's mainly like you know how the sector works. So much of the feedback is anecdotal. So obviously a big question we always get is just that, like, all of our parents live on Instagram. Why aren't we on Instagram? But I think when you actually drill down into the quality of the traffic, a lot of the time, that's where it becomes really interesting. So one of the things we've found over the last 6 months or so is that traffic from, so say if I place an advert on Instagram Reels, or if I place it on Instagram Stories, then typically the quality of the traffic that's then coming through to the school website is a lot lower. The bounce rates are a lot higher. Dwell times are a lot shorter. Whereas on Facebook, so if we're talking now top of funnel, typically we find that people spend longer reading through the adverts. We're finding they're slightly more engaged, things like that. So we look at it and it's like trying to remove any sort of emotion out of it, because I don't use Facebook at all. I use Instagram every day. But it's a case of what platform do I want to use and when? So a lot of our advice at the minute is like, right, if we've got someone through this funnel, actually Instagram story placements might be a friendly little reminder where we know we're not trying to get that buy-in. Whereas let's say if we're just going pure, we just want the cheapest CAC possible, then we're probably looking at TikTok. LinkedIn, really high CPMs, obviously a lot more targeted in terms of job title, etc., things like that. So I think it's definitely a case of horses for courses. But I'd say at the moment, whether it's internationally or UK based, we still consistently see the lowest cost per leads or cost per inquiries from Facebook, believe it or not.
I'm going to ask you 2 questions of 3s, Kerwyn. The first is, so this pod is the big things that schools are getting wrong when it comes to paid social. So I'm going to ask you, first of all, for 3 big mistakes that you see being rinsed and repeated across the schools that you work with.
Cool. I'll start sort of like more simple, then maybe end with one that's maybe slightly more complex. I think the first one is literally just as simple as ad copy on ads. Literally like so incredibly basic, but the number of adverts that I see that realistically, if you remove the name of the school, could apply to any school. And I think that's like sort of like literally the UK market's pretty bad for it, but it's just a case of like, if the mentioning of community spirit, the mentioning of pastoral care and things like this, I think we're trying to encourage, almost like the content is like either 100% functional or like just not really there. So it's more of a case of like, I think schools really need to, rather than saying, for example, we're brilliant at sports, here's a picture of our sports hall, which is what it seems like a lot of schools in the UK are doing at the moment. It's a case of we're brilliant at sports, meet so-and-so in year 9 who plays football at a national level. Here's how they use our facilities to help get towards that. So it's got trying to change the copy so it has that narrative within it. Maybe you're sort of like seeding in concrete outcomes, more aspirational, sort of like this is what they could come out as sort of thing. So I'd say the first one is definitely ad copy. And I think honestly it comes back to like you're saying about mindset. I think the willingness to be a bit riskier or to go outside of their brand tone of voice sometimes, and understanding that socials doesn't have to sound like the prospectus. It doesn't have to sound like your website. Second one I'd probably say is misunderstanding around retargeting. So I think there's a lot of advice given out that it's like, oh, get the Facebook pixel. The Facebook pixel will solve everything when it comes to retargeting. And I think that's, again, a bit of a misconception. I think they've simplified retargeting down into like, if you have this pixel on your website, then yeah, you're solved. But I think realistically, over the last 3-4 years, the pixel's become increasingly ineffective, really. And a lot of the time, we're only picking up 60 or 70% of the traffic coming to the website, depending on what devices people are using, things like that. So I think, again, it's encouraging schools to look into like their own conversions API. It's encouraging schools to maybe look at doing actual video retargeting, which we've found a lot more effective than just pixel retargeting, for example. So obviously we're chatting a lot about in terms of creating the customer journey and being able to effectively retarget, and having the tools in place to be able to do that is obviously paramount. So I think, again, schools being maybe 3 or 4 years behind and hearing about the Facebook pixel when it feels like it's probably died over the last 2 or 3 years could be frustrating. I think that's a big mistake. Third one, the number of school adverts I've seen across the last year that have sort of random music attached to the background or text changes, etc., that sort of thing. So I think there's been a real push, obviously, from Google and Meta to really push these AI optimization, whether it's through Performance Max or whether it's through Advantage Plus campaigns on Meta. Just be really, really careful when setting those campaigns up, I think, because what we're noticing is that they're trying to leave those settings on by default. So whether that's music optimizations, whether that's just taking the text that you've put in and completely changing it, which is obviously massively problematic for schools with a 1,000-year-old brand or 500-year-old brand, whatever. But just to be aware of Advantage Plus, just to make sure that like you're going in and unticking all of those boxes that seem to hide themselves better and better every single week, is definitely, last 6 months or so, been a massive headache.
Cool. So I think we've sort of created inadvertently a Venn diagram of threes here, because the final big mistake that schools are making, I think, also could be the first actionable tip that schools can take to improve their marketing, which is really keep an eye on AI taking over essentially and just their ads not being as they want them to be. So I'm going to ask you for 2 more actionable tips for school marketing and admissions teams when it comes to paid socials. Or you can broaden it out if you want to wider digital marketing.
Cool. Yeah, I think the first one is, and what we're trying to do a bit more when it's coming to campaigns is using more first party data. So I think obviously one of the biggest changes is obviously, but like I'm saying, in terms of sort of like pixel effectiveness and things like that and tracking, I think schools really need to get to grips with being more comfortable using email, whether it's email addresses of current parents, postcodes of current parents, behavior on the website, etc., to map out actual behaviors. Essentially, with interest targeting, it isn't quite as effective as it maybe was 2-3 years ago. So what we're trying to do a better job of now, and schools, actually every single school I've ever worked with have always had a wealth of data available to them, but it's more now taking that data and mapping out audiences by intent. So for example, if you can take rather than just having your slap bang radius, this is our day market, whatever, if you can map that out into growing areas, declining areas, stable markets, for example, and then that gives you the ability to go ahead and then personalize your messaging, whether maybe your declining audience, you need to be a bit more sales orientated, value added orientated. Maybe your growing market is literally just a case of sharing more student stories, whatever that might look like for that specific school. But I think taking data that might be living on their CRMs, ISAMs, SIMs, whatever, and actually processing that, whether that's through Claude, whether that's through ChatGPT, whatever, just to start building out those very specific personas is sort of massively beneficial in the long run and definitely benefits their funnel. Other bits and bobs. Let me have a think.
I want to ask you one. I want to force you to give this third tip. You can have a fourth one if you want. Schools are busy. The people who work there are kind of educators over, they're not necessarily technical marketers. So I think one really useful tip that you can hear from you, Kerwyn, who's got his finger on the pulse, is where can your average school marketer go to clue themselves up on this stuff? Where's easy resources that are easy to access, use, and put in place at their school if they can, if they kind of want to upskill themselves on this stuff?
Yeah, good shout. I think, yeah, and you're exactly right. Literally, again, if there's a common theme between all of our clients, is just that they all work 500 different jobs in one. Honestly, what I find easiest to do nowadays is that if across my TikTok, X, bit controversial maybe, but X and Instagram, what I've tried to do is just engage with more paid social, more marketing orientated content. So particularly across X, say for example, if you search, let's say you're in the marketing team and you're not sure how your website's performing and you actually want to take an interest in website conversion rate. If you literally just spend an hour searching for website conversion rate on X, engage with a couple of posts, even if it's liking them, opening them up or whatever, what we've often find and what we've managed to do internally, so this is what we'll try and do with the team and Ollie and I do, is essentially if you engage with that, that will start popping up on your For You page. So it depends how time poor you are, but obviously a lot of the time, whether that's on TikTok or an X, you can take these 30-second snippets from people who are maybe across other sectors and start to sort of like curate your feed. So even if I try and hop on there 15, 20 minutes a day, the amount of stuff that we then take and then save and put out into our newsletter and try and sort of like teach us over the week is massive. Outside of that, there's probably some very specific the paid media gurus, I think, maybe on YouTube. This is Couple, they're brilliant, always putting stuff out. But I think 9 times out of 10, TikTok and X tend to be the platforms that if you want actual insight from experts across retail or experts across other sectors, then that's typically where I go.
Very good, cool. Well, I think we'll say that is the third actionable tip. So thanks very much for that, Kerwyn. You've spoken in great detail and with great knowledge over the last 15 or so minutes about your area of specialism. If there are schools, school marketing and admissions leads listening to this right now and they're thinking, I want a little bit of Kerwyn, I'd like to speak to 15th Media, how do they do that? How do they find you? How do they get in touch?
Yeah, so we're literally just www.15thmedia.com is our website. I'm active on LinkedIn a fair bit. LinkedIn through the website is how people get in touch with us.
Great stuff. Well, thank you very much, Kerwyn, for your time, for your insights, your expertise. It's been great to chat with you. Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks for having me.